Hello everyone, and thank you for coming to my capstone presentation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Zeb Schreiber. I'm a born and raised Tahoe local and a competitive freeride skier. Over the past 6 years, I've had the opportunity to compete and ski all over the world in places like Austria and Alaska. Through those experiences, I've spent thousands of days in the mountains, places defined by ice and snow. During my time in the mountains, I've begun to notice changes in the landscapes that have shaped my life. Lines that once held snow deep into the spring are melting earlier. Glaciers that once felt permanent now look fragile. And seasons that used to be predictable are now becoming harder to recognize. At first, these changes felt subtle and easy to overlook. But the more time I spend in the mountains, the harder they become to ignore. Last winter, I was flown out to Europe with my teammates from Blizzard Technica. During our time there, we spent a little under a week in Chamonix, France. During one of our days in Chamonix, we set out to ski the Vallée Blanche. It's a 12-mile off-piste ski route that winds through high alpine glacier terrain, starting from the summit of the Aiguille du Midi, over 9,000 vertical feet from town. The run finishes on the famous Mur de Glace, the largest glacier in France. At the bottom, there's a historic train that connects the glacier to the town of Chamonix. When the train opened in 1909, passengers could step directly off the train and onto the ice. But when I was there last winter, it looked a little bit different. Instead of stepping off the glacier and into the station, we had to climb nearly 200 stairs and take a gondola just to reach the platform. The glacier had retreated so far that the station now sat high above the ice. Standing there, looking at how far the glacier retreated, the scale of this problem hit me like a slap in the face. I'd always heard that glaciers were melting, but in that moment I finally understood how much of an issue it really was. The retreat of glaciers affects far more than the landscape itself. It impacts the people who live near them and the communities that depend on them for recreation, tourism, and their livelihoods. For skiers like me, glaciers aren't just scenery, they're part of the places and cultures we care deeply about. And the numbers behind this are staggering. Scientists estimate that glaciers worldwide have lost more than 9 trillion tons of ice since the 1960s, and that rate is continuing to accelerate. So that experience in France got me thinking, if glaciers are melting in the Alps, what's happening where glaciers are even bigger? And the first place that came to mind is Alaska. Alaska is the most glaciated region in the Western Hemisphere, outside of Greenland and Antarctica. The state holds more than 100 times the glacier ice of the rest of the United States combined. My first experience on a glacier actually happened there in 2009 when I was only 16 months old. My parents took me and my sister to the town of Kennecott. Kennecott is a small historic copper mining town deep within the mountains of the Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve. It's also a very special place for me and my family. My sister Elia is actually named after Mount St. Elias. That's a picture of her sitting right on the Kennecott Glacier. Right next to town is the massive Kennecott Glacier, which stretches more than 27 miles down from the surrounding mountains. I obviously don't remember much from my time there in 2009, but I was lucky to return in 2021. Seeing the glacier years later gave me a completely different perspective. I wasn't just looking at a cool natural feature, I was looking at a landscape that's changing. Many glaciers in Alaska, including the Kennecott Glacier, have been steadily retreating as temperatures warm. Scientists estimate that the Kennecott Glacier could lose around 50% of its mass by the year 2100. Seeing a place like that makes glacier recession feel real. Instead of just numbers and graphs, it's a place I've actually stood and a place I've seen with my own eyes. But before we talk more about what's happening to glaciers, it helps to understand how glaciers actually work. Glaciers grow and form because of snowfall. Snow falls onto the ground, and if temperatures stay cold enough, that snow doesn't completely melt during the summer. Instead, each winter, a new layer builds on top of the previous one. Over time, the weight of the new snow compresses the layers beneath it. As the pressure increases, the snow crystals begin to compact and slowly form into dense glacial ice. This process can take decades, sometimes even centuries. Once enough ice accumulates, the glacier becomes so heavy that it begins to move under its own weight. It slowly flows downhill, carving its way through the landscape. Glaciers are constantly balancing two processes, accumulation and melting. Accumulation happens when snowfall adds more ice to the glacier, mostly at higher elevation where the temperatures stay colder. Melting, also known as ablination, happens at lower elevation where warmer temperatures cause ice to melt. If a glacier gains more ice than it loses each year, it grows. But if it loses more ice than it gains, it begins to shrink and retreat. This is what we refer to as glacial recession. This balance shows that glaciers are not static formations. They're dynamic systems that respond directly to changes in temperature and climate. With that basic understanding, I wanted to explore what these changes look like in real mountain environments. During my research, I chose to focus on two regions that are personally significant to me, Mount Hood and Alaska. For me, these landscapes are much more than just points on a map. They're places tied closely to outdoor recreation and places I've learned to love through the time I've spent exploring them. By studying these two regions, I hope to better understand not only how glaciers are changing, but also what those changes mean for people who live, work, and explore in these mountains. To guide my research, I focused on three essential questions. The first being, how do changes in glaciers affect the communities, ecosystems, and outdoor cultures that depend on them? The second is, how can personal experiences in nature change the way we think about climate change? And the third is, how can we motivate people who may never see glaciers in person to care about and invest in their climate future? To explore these questions, I spoke with several experts who spend their careers studying and working in glacial environments. One of them was Mike Loso, a glaciologist and the head of research stewardship and science for the Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve. I also spoke with Nicholas Bakken-French, a professional ski and alpine guide who works throughout Alaska, the Sierra Nevada, and the Cascade Range. In addition to guiding, Nicholas is also a glaciologist and an environmental researcher. Speaking with these experts helped me realize that glaciers connect far more than just scientific research. They influence water systems, recreation, ecosystems, and entire communities that rely on the mountains. And in many places, those systems are beginning to change. One place where these changes are especially visible is Mount Hood. Mount Hood is the tallest mountain in Oregon and one of the most glaciated peaks within the continental United States outside of Alaska. The mountain holds more than a dozen named glaciers, including the Elliott, Coe, Sandy, and Reed glaciers. However, glaciers on Mount Hood are much smaller and more sensitive to changes in temperature than the massive glaciers found in Alaska. Because of this, they respond very quickly to shifts in climate. Over the past century, many of Mount Hood's glaciers have steadily retreated. The transformation affects far more than what we see on the mountain. The glaciers on Mount Hood act as natural water reservoirs. During the summer months, melting ice feeds rivers and streams that support forests, wildlife, and the nearby communities. As glaciers shrink, that long-term water storage becomes less reliable. These glaciers also shape the mountain's outdoor culture. Mount Hood attracts climbers, skiers, guides, and researchers from all over the world. As glaciers change, climbing routes shift, ice conditions become less stable, and the landscapes that people have experienced for generations begin to disappear. Mount Hood is especially interesting because its glaciers sit right on the edge of where they can survive. Even small shifts in temperature or snowfall can determine whether the glaciers grow, stay stable, or disappear. And scientists project that if warming trends continue, Mount Hood's glaciers could be gone within 50 years. That's not far away. If change isn't made, future generations might never have the chance to see a glacial within the lower 48 states. But to fully understand the scale of this glacial change, we need to look somewhere much larger. Alaska holds more than 100,000 glaciers spread across its mountain ranges. These glaciers exist in massive systems like the Alaska Range, the Chugach Mountains, and the Wrangell Mountains. Some stretch for dozens of miles, flowing slowly from high snow-covered peaks down into valleys, forests, and even the ocean. During my conversations with Mike Loso, we connect through our shared passion for skiing. He talked about how many of the most meaningful experiences of his life happened while traveling across glaciers. For him, glaciers are not just scientific features, they're places where people explore, learn, and build lifelong memories. While glaciers aren't the only place where people enjoy snow, the health of glaciers and the health of the snowpack are closely connected. If temperatures become too warm for glaciers to survive, they're certainly too warm for reliable snow as well. Because Alaska's glaciers are so large and spread across so many different climates, they provide valuable insight into how quickly our planet is changing. And what scientists are observing is clear. Even these massive glaciers are beginning to retreat. When ice systems this large are shrinking, it shows that the forces driving glacial recession are affecting mountain communities across the entire world. Growing up in Tahoe, skiing has always been a huge part of my life and my community. Winters shape the rhythm of life in mountain towns. People work in ski resorts, guide in the backcountry, and build entire cultures around snow. But Tahoe is actually a relatively warm mountain region compared to places like interior Alaska. Because of this, regions like the Sierra Nevada are especially vulnerable to rising temperatures. If warming continues at the current rate, snowfall in places like Tahoe could cease to exist entirely. And our mountain environment cannot survive without snow. This brings me back to my essential questions. Through my research and with insight from the experts I interviewed, I was able to develop the following responses. To begin with, glaciers affect much more than the landscapes we see in the mountains. In many regions, especially places like Alaska, glaciers are a major part of the environment. As they retreat, entire systems begin to change. New lakes and rivers can form, plants begin to grow in areas that were once covered by ice, and wildlife gradually moves into these newly exposed landscapes. These changes also affect people. As glaciers melt, they contribute to rising sea levels, which can impact coastal cities and communities around the world. Glacier loss can also reshape outdoor recreation. Activities like mountaineering, glacier travel, and certain types of skiing depend on these icy landscapes. And as glaciers shrink, those opportunities begin to diminish. So in places where glaciers define the landscape, their disappearance doesn't just change the environment, it changes the way people interact with it as well. Another important question is, how does personal experience in nature shape the way we understand climate change? For many people, including Dr. Mike Colosso, a connection to the environment begins with a single experience in the outdoors. In his case, it was seeing a glacier in Chamonix for the first time that sparked his curiosity and eventually led him to study glaciers. When people spend time in nature, whether skiing, hiking, or climbing, they start to notice changes in the landscape. Because of this, personal experiences can transform climate change from an abstract global issue into something real and visible. Instead of just hearing about environmental change, people can actually see and feel it happening in the places they care about. Finally, this raises an important challenge. How do we motivate people who have never seen glaciers in person? One of the biggest challenges with climate change is that it can be difficult to see. We experience weather every day, but climate is something that changes slowly over time. Glaciers help make those changes visible. When scientists monitor glaciers over many years, they can clearly see how quickly these landscapes are changing. Even if someone never visits a glacier, they can still understand why they matter. Glaciers influence sea levels, ecosystems, and water systems that affect communities around the entire world. Because of this, storytelling, education, and scientific communication play a huge role. By sharing research and personal experiences in these environments, we can help people understand why glaciers matter and why it's important for our shared climate future. Throughout my project, I set out to film and produce a short film centered around skiing to spread awareness for glacier recession. All of the skiing was filmed on Mount Hood last summer, featuring skiing from myself, Ryan Lapp, Owen McKibben, and Mac Winterberger. Questions?